he had eyes. One of them looked up, the other one looked down. It was hard for him to read. It was hard for him to drive. We were praying one night in our church. Nobody even asked for his healing. This really sweet presence of the Lord came down upon us, and the guy walked away healed. And we're all like, man, this is crazy.
What's up, everybody? We're having some audio problems in this video, but please watch the video because today we're having a discussion with a full-time apologist, somebody who really knows their stuff and has been defending the gospel for years. I have since fixed my mic, so don't worry about the quality of the audio in forthcoming videos, but I just couldn't delete this video. I had to upload it for y'all. I hope you enjoy.
Hey everybody, how y'all doing? I really appreciate you clicking on the video today. Today we're going to ask some apologetics questions, but you'll notice there's something a little bit different about today's video. I'm wearing glasses, and also for those who are even more observant, I've got a guest on the channel today, a good friend of mine, Bill Scott, who is the Assistant Director of Ratio Christi International and the Chapter Director here at HCU, and is just a full-time apologist whom I draw a lot of wisdom from. So I'm pleased to have you on today, Bill.
I feel sorry for you if you're drawing wisdom from me, buddy. I don't.
Hey, we're not starting with much.
Fair enough. All right, let's go. Let's do this.
Awesome. So yeah, I mean, we've had a lot of cool conversations these last, probably couple of months here, Bill, and I would really love for my viewers to get in on some of the action and the conversation. So I'm just going to ask you a real doozy question right up front.
Okay.
Medicine or prayer? You're terminally ill. Pick one.
No, I'm not going to pick one. That's a false dichotomy, man. Now, when I pray for somebody, I believe in healing. I mean, first of all, I've seen people be healed. I've seen people be healed of things that are just that just fly against medical know-how and knowledge. I would, and one of those in particular was we were in a prayer meeting one night in my church back home in Kentucky, and this guy named Ben, who would gladly come on this show and confirm this. He is a student at Asbury now, actually, and he had eyes that were like, he had all kinds of things wrong with them, but one of them looked up, the other one looked down. It was hard for him to read. It was hard for him to drive and all this stuff. And as we were praying one night in our church, nobody even asked for his healing. This really sweet presence of the Lord came down upon us, and the guy walked away healed. And we're all like, man, this is crazy. That's amazing. He was told at 7 years old that his eyes would never be fixed, but God fixed them. That's one of many examples. But that every time I pray for somebody's healing, I'm always praying that people would, that the Lord would give the doctors wisdom, and things like that, because all wisdom is from above. It says that in James. So, if all of our wisdom comes from God, that means God endues doctors with wisdom too. And so if God's given the doctors wisdom, there's no reason why he couldn't use a doctor to heal somebody as well. So I say medicine and prayer, and use good wisdom in the meantime as to, what medicines you should or should not use or whatever. But yeah, so I don't see any problem with both.
I would agree. What you're not allowed to do is create a universe that doesn't exist, whereby prayer and medicine are mutually exclusive, and then foist me into that situation and ask me what I would do. I don't care about that universe. I'm in this one where there's both. Right. And I think it's also, I think I would pray that the natural medicine works, right? And also I think if you look at creation, even things that we consider natural work because, and this sort of will go into more stuff to do with creation if we're not careful, but essentially the natural was created supernaturally, correct? Because the supernatural God created the natural order and laws. But yeah, I think that's a funny question that as an apologist, especially a less seasoned one, it's easy to let the other side lead the conversation. But it's like, I'm not trying to prove God on your terms. I'm trying to give evidence for the God that's revealed himself to us in the universe.
Think of it like this too, Matthew, is that Ask the question, did the early church have use for doctors? Yeah. I mean, this is a gospel issue. And I'll tell you why, because one of the gospels was written by a doctor. Luke was a physician. So obviously there were physicians within the apostolic band of people that were running around preaching and teaching and things like that. So it's even the earliest of church fathers, one of the gospel writers, in the history, in our Christian history, was a physician. So I don't think the church has ever took a stand to say, the only people that take a stand against medicine are like Jehovah's Witnesses won't take like blood transfusions. Christian Science thinks that, that bunch, that's, it's, in other words, it's cults that don't believe in medicine. Orthodox Christians are like, yeah, man, medicine's cool.
And
whatever.
I think if you look at the origins of genuine rational study of medicine, there's a lot of Christian roots in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it roots in that kind of that we set up a lot of that. Same with universities and things like that. Let's not let them rewrite history and say that we're anti-science. In fact, it is not science and God waging war against one another. They actually fit together very nicely when you consider the category of miracles being a real thing, as well as the natural law being carried out.
Agreed. Like you said, I think it's a false dichotomy. So medicine, I say medicine and prayer.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, all right. Well, let's move on real quick. I came across a video a while back, and it did have me thinking for a second. It had me thinking about the nature of who Christ is, what a Christian is, and what our role is. And the question was, why would I be a Christian when Christians are hypocrites? When Christian people still sin, when they espouse a certain way of living, but they inevitably fail. Why would I listen to you when you're not even doing it? What's a good way to respond to that as an apologist?
I think there are several ways you can respond to that. I think the one that gets people's attention is when I'm talking to somebody on the street and they say something like that, and they'll say, why would I go to church just filled full of hypocrites? I'm like, yeah, that's we're working on that. We're working on everybody not being hypocrites. That's exactly right. Another thing is another idea that I've thought about often is that oftentimes the secular standard is much higher than God's standard for people. God just asks us to walk in the light as He is in the light, and the blood of Jesus will cleanse us from all sin, according to 1 John. So as we're walking in the light, what that means is there's a growth process taking place that oftentimes Christians themselves can't even see their blind spots. But part of discipleship is actually, and we need more of it in the West especially, is that we need to entrust ourselves with a group of people that will hold us accountable, that will say, like, they'll point out those blind spots, like, do you realize you're doing this, Bill? Like, ooh, and some of the people that I really love and admire are the people that absolutely do that and will tell me things that I need to hear so that I can look more like Christ. I mean, the goal is to look more like Jesus next year than I do this year. That should be the goal for every Christian. Ultimately, if Christ is the standard, then there's always going to be some sort of hypocrisy in our life. But we should also be obeying the Lord. I mean, Christians should live above board. And I think more Christians need to say that. We need to quit excusing people's sins and things like that when a major Christian leader fails and does something sexually immoral and stupid, and then we all say, well, and then you'll hear people say as an excuse almost, like, well, we're all sinners saved by grace. So it's like no. there is on a certain level here,
right? Because you could argue that the skeptic in that case would have a point against that point. Like, if I'm not going to get better because you guys ain't getting better, then why would I give myself to a God who who isn't going to improve
Yeah.
me and clean me. Like I can't stop sleeping with women and cussing, but my Christian neighbor does the same. That God doesn't appeal to me very much, even if I
Right.
want to stop.
Well,
Yeah.
and Christians should take that into consideration. It says to be wise when we deal with people on the outside, and to abstain from evil. I mean, the Bible does teach us all of that, and I think we could use a healthy dose of that in Western society to say that Christians ought to live out the way we're called to live, and but that all that being said, the grace side of that is that we're all in process here. We're all learning. And when we see a Christian living in a way that does not reflect biblical principles, well, then they have some growing to do, but that doesn't make them any less of a Christian, possibly, And that's true. If you apply the same standard to every single walk of life, you're going to find hypocrisy everywhere. And honestly, that is kind of a hard issue too. It's like oftentimes the people that are calling Christians hypocrites and will say they'll never join the church are also the same people that are saying that that are very judgmental, and oftentimes it's like Christians are judgmental. It's like, well, isn't that being judgmental too? Like when you
Yeah.
just write off a whole group of people because
Well,
say
and
they're
that's
judgmental.
where the Bible's true, whether you believe it or not. You will be judged the way that you judge,
Right.
and that's not necessarily just that's not necessarily just a prescription. It's a description of what's going to
Yeah.
happen. I think as well, it's important when you're sat across from somebody. I learned this from if you've ever been on TikTok, you know who Cliff is. Cliff Nettle or something. His name.
Oh yeah,
He's
the
a
dude that goes
big
on college
apologist
campuses.
online. Yeah, and he will say things like, if Christianity was true, would you give your life to Christ? And if somebody says yes, then it's like, okay, we'll proceed. If somebody says no, it's like, well, hold on a second. You know what I'm saying? So I think I would ask them, okay, I hear you. If there was a perfect example, would that make you a Christian? No. Because if they say no to that, then that is actually a fake reason. There's another reason. And I think if they say, yeah, I would, then we have some good news for them.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that is partly why Jesus had to come and live that life so that he was above reproach. And we can't say that he either doesn't know or didn't do what we're being called to do. And that's why I think where I was guided and where I've guided people who are new Christians, go and read the Gospels. Go and
Yeah.
read the Gospels and tell me there isn't an example. See how Jesus walked daily and treated people.
I heard a man say, much wiser than me one time, Matt, that he said, you cannot judge a religion by its followers, you judge it by its books.
Amen.
And I think that's what we have to come back to. You don't judge a religion, because believe me, yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of my time in different churches and in different countries, and there's even like a geographical element to the amount of like people in East Africa, for example. Like there's some churches I could take you to in East Africa that are, I mean, these guys are like living, like give up their life to live in the slums with people and put themselves in danger every day and things like that. And if I tried to judge my faith against that standard, I think I would fall short, let alone Jesus' standard, So it's like, define hypocrite for me. Like that's another thing too, right? But I think
Yeah.
like in closing, I would just leave it at what John Wesley said. One of the things he was famous for saying, I've paraphrased, he said, we should strive to live in the biblical standard, and dare we not ever preach above that standard or below that standard. We should live in the biblical standard, and that's the standard set out for us all. So if you try to preach above that standard, like it, oftentimes that's where some of the hypocritical Christianity comments come from. It's like
Yeah.
oftentimes people are holding Christians above the biblical standard when they say
Right.
that.
And it's interesting. You can't pin them back down and call them. I mean, not that this would work anyway, but the reason they don't get called hypocrites is because if you can move the goalpost, why would you ever get caught in hypocrisy? There's no moral standard. It's rather whatever is in vogue in society is where they're at, and they just kind of keep the needle right around there. There is something about a hypocrite that means they did at one point stand for something. Now that's not enough, and I think the Bible is very clear with that. But as you mentioned, there is going to be some buffering between the standard of God and your growth as such, to the point where you'll have some hypocritical moments.
Yep.
Okay,
We all have
awesome.
them.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this is an interesting question. I mean, we've all seen two people. They say heroes and villains have the same backstory. Um, Now, not to call saved people heroes and unsaved villains, but how can two people look at the same world and one say, "Man, where is God? I don't see him anywhere," and the other say, "There must be a God. My conscience bears witness to a God."
Well, there are, um, there are some things that go into this question. I mean, it's just not. It's actually a harder question to answer than you could, because you're trying to kind of psychologize all kinds of different people into like two categories. That's really hard to
Yeah.
do. That's always
Yeah.
problematic. But in general, there are a few things that have to take place for somebody to become a Christian. One is, as Scripture says, none come to the Father, or none come to the Son unless the Father draws him. And it reminds me of the night I got saved, many years ago in a jail in Kentucky. I was in there for, like drugs and stuff like that. My lifestyle was totally out of control. I'd actually went to the jail went to that church that night, because in jail they trade stuff around all the time. I wasn't going there to find God. I was there to just buy cigarettes and go back to my cell, and you know 5 of us got saved out of the 30 guys that were there that night. But you could tell there was an atmosphere within that place that was just very, like, I can still remember pretty vividly, looking around me, and there was a seriousness to the atmosphere. And then when they called the guys to the front of the room to pray for salvation, there's only 5 of us that came up there. Not to say that other people sitting there in their seats didn't pray too. They might have. But I was incarcerated with a few of those guys, and none of them had the same experience I did. But so there's that element to it, that, like, at what degree does God draw somebody at a given time, and are they ready to receive Christ at that time? And it's not to say that somebody rejecting something today may accept it a year from now or something. So I don't know. And then there's another element to that question too, like where people people perceive the world through a different lens, and that's we call that worldview. I know that after I became a Christian, I began to view the world very differently, which led me down a path where I am today. I started seeing the importance of worldview. I have friends, close friends that are atheists, and close friends that are Muslims. I mean, when we talk about this, worldview, philosophy, philosophy of religion, the way you view things, the lens in which you view things, and of course, you have your crazy polarizing sides of all of this, where I'm not saying that every atheist or every naturalist would go out and do this, but Adolf Hitler could read Charles Darwin and then quote in Mein Kampf his manifesto for the what he saw would be basically the revival of German nationalism or whatever.
Yeah.
And part of that was, he said, we've got to cleanse according to natural selection, we need to cleanse the lesser races. And that included for him gypsies, homosexuals, Africans, and Jewish people, but especially Jewish people, and so that was the way Hitler viewed things, through the lens of what he thought science was backing up. And then you go the other direction, the extreme other way. You've got people like the Amish and stuff like that, the way they view Scripture and the way they view the world. They totally isolate themselves and live in their own communities and things like that. But it's amazing to me that like we neglect sometimes to think about the way we view the world, like we all wear, like you're wearing glasses right now. That's what you see. You see with greater clarity because those things are on. But if those glasses were broken, then you're going to see with a lesser clarity. You've got to go get them fixed somewhere. And sometimes people are looking at the world through a lens that is dirty, and sometimes that really peppers the way you look at God, interpret God. There's a famous book. I'm trying to remember the name. It's not that famous, but it was famous enough for people to hear about it. I think it was called The Faith of Their Fathers, and it talked about one definite correlation. They surveyed thousands of atheists throughout this book. I think it was thousands, hundreds or thousands. And almost every interview, they said 80%, 8 out of 10 people that they interviewed that were atheists had father issues, had daddy issues, basically. Either an absentee father, or the father was not very emotional, or something like that would come up. Or they felt like the relationship with their dad was fractured. So, I mean, there's, when you read that, I mean, 8 out of 10 might seem like a lot, and somebody who's skeptical might say, well, that's a huge number. Well, even if it was 5 out of 10, like half of all atheists have some sort of father issue going on.
Yeah.
We need to take that into consideration as apologists when we talk to people too, that this is not just an intellectual endeavor. This is a very pastoral endeavor to try to get to the heart, try to build a bridge with people. And I think all that comes back to it.
I think there's a lot of that going on in culture. I mean, if you look at say the more radical feminist movements, or just the breakdown of the encouragement to get married young, and for men to lead biblically as they're called to do, in the way that they're called to do it, and for the roles that each gender falls into, I do think that a rejection from both parties is, like, if you're a man and you decide you don't want to be selfless and try to provide for others, you don't want to be a gentle but firm leader, it is a rejection of who God is, because we get all of that from God. And in a way, because God is a father, having a fractured relationship with a father, it's gonna sully your image of who God is in that very same way. I remember when I was growing up, though, so I grew up in a secular home, and but I did always believe in a creator. I didn't know Jesus, but I did always believe in a God. But there was a few times, because I didn't have that relationship, I didn't think God knew me or cared about me or had a plan for my salvation. And say when I started drinking or discovered women, I was like, well, I know logically, I didn't have this conversation in my head necessarily, but I was having it kind of in the back of my mind. I tried to persuade myself that because a God, I don't know, there's plenty of these gods, don't know who to pick, don't know what the truth is. Logically speaking, if there's no God of the universe, I can do what I want and there's no rules, and being nice is just kind of a social construct. Because if there is no God, these rules that we're making up, that we live by society, they are arbitrary. There's no way around it, I don't think. Mm-hmm. And I tried to persuade myself of that. But every time I tried to do it, it was just like, who are you kidding, man? You know in your soul that there's something real about this, and that's what kept my heart open. I tried to close it off a few times so that I could go and fully go that hedonistic direction and go crazy and do exactly what I wanted and really be I mean, I was already my own God, but really reign terror in a way that my flesh would have loved. But I just didn't quite, I knew it wasn't the truth, and that I resisted a little bit. I always had that little bit of resistance. And then, I still drove myself to a place where, things were really bad, and I still did treat myself as if I wasn't created in the image of God, for sure. But I think if I were able, and I'm glad I wasn't, if I was able to violate my conscience and persuade myself of that lie, that actually none of this does matter, and you can go and do what you want, my life might be very different right now. I'm glad that God graced me with. It's hard to talk about exactly what that was or what drove that decision, But put it this way, I'm glad it went that way, because I'm not so sure that it goes that way for everybody, to be honest.
Yeah, we're some of the lucky ones, man, for sure.
Yeah,
Amen.
absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so let's move on. I'm going to ask you one more question, Bill.
Sure.
Let's move on. I want to talk about something that I heard Andrew Tate say the other day.
Okay.
So you're about to hear some wisdom, right? So
yeah.
he was.
Let me set up for this one. I'm ready. Okay.
he was talking about Christian nations having to stand up for themselves, and they can't just rely on Christ coming back one day. They got to go, and they've got to really rule with a bit more authority in this world, in Christian majority nations, and they shouldn't accept disrespect towards the cross. They shouldn't accept persecution of Christians. They should be, and he's a Muslim, and he looks at these Muslim nations, and he likes that they rule with an iron fist in their countries. He likes that because he thinks that correlates with the truth of their faith, and he thinks that that's the will of a real God, essentially. Is his worldview right, or is there something he's misunderstanding about the nature of the kingdom that Christ has ushered in with his death and resurrection?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are. I don't know. It's just two different. First of all, like, Islam is a very law-based religion. It's a very law-based system, and it is like a total system in the sense that when you start studying Islam, you have to take seriously the Sharia law and things like that. And some of the first-person sources that I have in the shelves directly behind me here, this is my Islam section in my library here, is Islamic jurisprudence and things like that. So it's part of it's a very governmental system. It always has been. Whereas Jesus preached a different kind of system. His system is all encompassing, but it's not just part of this world. He taught us to pray, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And what exactly does that mean? It's like this kingdom is here, and it's present, and it's still coming, but his kingdom is not of this world. Yet he has preached a gospel of love and of patience. I was just reading verses, some of these standout verses like this in my morning meditations today, in 1 Corinthians 13, for example, and Galatians 5:22 and 23, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. And, it says nothing in there about, oppression and and pushing an agenda and doing some of the things that some of the more Muslim-based nations advocate for. So I would say that he's wrong in his interpretation of what Christianity is supposed to be, because the kingdom of God is a kingdom of love and patience and peace and beauty. And whereas, you can find love, peace, patience, and beauty in Islam, but the governmental system is often very oppressive and very overbearing and has something to say about every part of your life. And depending on what part of the world you're from, that governmental system can range from oppressive to liberal to, to whatever. And it's also interesting to note, too, that, it shows Andrew Tate's ignorance of his own religion, I think, because I have friends here in Houston from Turkey who are living here now because they had the wrong kind of Islam and were booted out of their country or basically ran out of their country by the current dude in charge there. I guess he's a president. And then you have Iranians as well who that cannot stand. They protest and have underground churches and leave the country. Lady that used to cut my hair whenever I had hair back in Kentucky, her name was Fatima, and she left Iran during the revolution, and she left Iran because they were threatening to kill her and her family, kill her husband actually and her family, because she was the wrong kind of Islam. And so it's not like it's a Muslim versus Christian thing. I think Andrew Tate doesn't understand the way this works. It's a whoever's in charge thing. So you have, Salafism and Wahhabism and Sunni and Shia, and all these people are always and these are all Muslim factions that fight against each other, and like Salafis, Wahhabis are within Sunnis and all that. It's just so much more complicated than just saying like, oh, Muslim nations are like this and Christian nations are like this. Like, which Muslim nation are you talking about? Which Christian nation are you talking about? Because as far as I can tell, we just passed a big Supreme Court decision here that would have never made it through if we didn't have something in our Declaration of Independence that said that we are created we have inalienable rights as endued by our Creator, which is predicated upon the doctrine of we're all made in the image of God. So, yeah, so it's like, I don't know. I think Christian nations produce more freedoms, more rights. It's a different kind of government, so there's more patience. It's a reflection of that. And then and that's an average Christian nation like Britain or America, whereas your average Muslim nation like Saudi Arabia or Iran would have less human rights and things, and it's just always kind of been the case. Although now you're seeing Saudi Arabia get updated and all of this, and now they've made this revolutionary decision in the last 5 years, I guess, that women can finally drive in Saudi Arabia. So I mean, some of these nations are kind of updating and things, and there's a lot of internal strife going on there too. So yeah, I would say that Andrew Tate, as usual, is ignorant about what he's talking about.
Yeah, I think he's misinformed. You touched on like the more global and the reality of what's happening here on the ground. I would also say it's a misunderstanding of Jesus's mission. Like if we had,
sure.
If we enforced, say we looked at what the Bible said was a sin, and we enforced that by law, again, made laws against that. Like it's illegal not to love thy neighbor, things like that. Like we actually made laws according to. Also, if you read the New Testament, it's not set up the same way. For example,
right.
Levitical law was, or so right. it wouldn't achieve what Jesus came to achieve, which was for each and every individual to believe on His name and have victory over sin in Christ. It wouldn't achieve that.
Yeah.
And I think Christ encapsulated. I think he answered this question in a funny way when he was talking to Pontius Pilate, and he said, I'm paraphrasing. He said, "If this was the kingdom that I was worried about, if I was worried about overthrowing Rome, you wouldn't have been able to arrest me. That's not what That's not what I'm here for. You guys are actually just helping me achieve something that I need done for my eternal spiritual kingdom." And I think a misunderstanding of that is emblematic of his misunderstanding of the whole thing. And also, he showed his cards once, Bill. He told me that he told me. I watched the video of him telling the interviewer, he's actually one of my buddies. No, I'm doing it. But he told the interviewer that he chose Islam because Islam, he agreed with a lot of the things they had to say, and a lot of their laws and things like that. And I don't know about you, but I chose Christ because he is everything I was not. And I didn't choose him because I was like, yeah, you know what? I'm kind of like Jesus. Yeah, I'm pretty similar. I'll just worship him. In that case, just worship yourself, which essentially, if you look at his practice of Islam, he still does what he wants. He's really not living to the letter of the law. Yeah.
I don't. Most Muslims I know, I don't think they would say that Andrew Tate's an accurate portrayal of the best kind of Muslim you'd want to be. And you can feel free to quote me and use that as a short. Maybe that'll get some hits. I would debate him on that. Like, are you really even a Muslim, bro? I mean, you think just because you don't eat pork and you go to a mosque on Friday, you're a Muslim? Like there's like Muslims that take it serious actually are very passionate and oftentimes the ones that I know, and I run in these circles quite a bit. I do a lot of intercultural dialogue. The ones that I know are very passionate, very peaceful, very loving, very family oriented, which I'm not sure that he really. I don't know. I don't watch Andrew Tate a lot, obviously, but he's never struck me as like a guy that really had a big concern about raising children and all of that. But most Muslims take that very serious. But taking Andrew Tate out of this, it's like you were saying there. Jesus told a parable, and somebody asked if they should pay taxes to Caesar. What did he do? He didn't tell a parable, but he took a coin, and he said, "Whose head's on this coin?" They said, "Caesar's." He said, "Render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's. Render unto God what is God's." Well, and it makes you wish there was a follow-up question there, and they would have said, "Well, what is God's?" And he would say, "Whose face is upon you?" You know, like you are God's, so you need to render yourself unto Him. And I think that's one of the big differences. As the Muslim conquerors, a lot of people think they conquered mostly by sword, but it was some by sword, mostly, especially in North Africa, through coercion and through taxes. And so they said, you pay this 3% tax if you're not a Muslim, but hey, you guys over here that are heretical Christians that don't believe that Jesus was the Son of God and don't believe in the Trinity, we're very similar, so you might as well just join us and avoid the tax. I saw an excellent paper on that last year at ETS. I'd never thought of it that way, but he was going through all the information that pointed back to most of these converts in North Africa were economic converts in a lot of ways. And it was because, and he built a case on, and I believe it, we desperately need to understand the doctrine of the Trinity and the doctrine of the humanity and divinity of Christ and our Christology. And understanding those two things it puts us way far ahead in even our current missiological position. So, yeah, I'm in agreement with that. That was the big problem.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. Yeah, I think was it.
Oh, I lost you there for a minute.
Oh,
there you are.
Yeah, I lost you. Go ahead.
You said you were going to say something. I lost you.
I was going to say most Christians, and I still, do have some questions. Most Christians really struggle to understand the Trinity. I think we should probably spend more time talking about it as Christians and going over it. I mean, I don't remember the last time a pastor really gave a sermon that was devoted to explaining the Trinity in the Sunday service that I was sat in. But it is incredibly important because it's not just a throwaway attribute of the God of the Bible, but it's an attribute that is he has always been, like all of his other attributes, and it's integral to also understanding how we are to be in relationship with God, seeing as he is a God of relationship himself. It's something that most people are probably. I think it was Timothy said. Wait, did you say it? Or Timothy said most Christians are probably Trinitarian heretics in some way or another.
It's a lot of people don't know how to think about the Trinity. That's for sure, and that's something I'm trying to tighten up myself right now. As I'm trying to operate in this global perspective, in this global realm, I've really come down to if we can defend the Word of God as being valid. If we can defend who Jesus is, if we can defend the Trinity, then we've came a long way in our apologetics. I mean, I think those three things are very, very, very important. Which brings us back into like classical Christianity, really. Especially those last two. It's anti-Nicene Christianity in a nutshell.
Yeah. So. Well, and it's like a sport where when you know the basics very well, everything else tends to play out better for you. If you get the basics wrong, maybe you can still come up with compelling points and win arguments, but it doesn't mean that you're fundamentally telling the truth as well as you could be. And that's something when I had a class with Lacona, he roasted me a couple of times on a few discussion boards.
He's good at that.
It's not good enough to say compelling things that are in your favor in terms of apologetics. It has to be true. Like it's not like for example, if we're going to talk about Islam, we can't just make them look horrendous and
Right.
misrepresent what's going on. Rather, because also these are souls as well. It's not just we're trying to save souls from Islam. We're trying to save Muslims with the truth of the gospel. So it's important to represent their side of it truthfully. And I think, if I remember correctly, it's Thomas Aquinas, right, who in his Summa Theologica, he does a really good job of presenting different positions than his own before rendering his
Yeah.
response. And you gotta do that, because at the end of the day, we're all going to be stood in front of God, man. It doesn't matter how many people you impress with your apologetics. If you were just talking a bunch of crap,
Yeah.
even if you're saved, it's going to be an interesting conversation.
Yeah. No, it's true. Like I'm big on that. You should always. I think it was pre-COVID Jordan Peterson. That was my favorite Jordan Peterson. Was when back in the day, he said, it was. I don't agree with everything he says, but I thought this was good. He said something along the lines of, he said we should represent the side we're opposed to like the best, like as best as we possibly can, like give them the benefit of the doubt, like really attack where they're coming from, the ideas in which are actually bad, instead of just trying to straw man and perform all these ad hominem attacks, as we get all the time as apologists. I mean, we're oftentimes personally attacked, and you have to have thick skin to be an apologist. It's like people can make, and we do live in a time where people can make you look bad. If people can discredit you and make you look stupid, then people aren't going to take you very seriously, because a lot of people don't understand logic,
Right.
basic rules of logic.
And also, a lot of people aren't. Maybe it's by mistake. Maybe it's, for some people it's on purpose. If you truly care about the truth, finding out you're wrong is actually okay. Because if the truth sets you free, why would I want to win in my own falsehood? That doesn't do anything for me. And if Christ, I don't know about you, I only worship Christ because he's true. I don't want to worship him if he's not. If all of this is just hocus pocus, then it's not actually worth it. So you do want to, when you have a question, you do want to drive into the back of it. And if you have worries and concerns for anybody watching, and you feel like something isn't true, you're not somebody who should get shunned. No, you're somebody who's pursuing the truth. And if Christ is trustworthy, he'll come good in the end. And if he's not, then don't worship him anymore. It's quite simple.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my journey started, as like a new ager and things like that. Was converted from that, and it's like been a 15-year pursuit of truth, and I've had doubts all along the way. And it just comes back to, Jesus rose from the dead. All of this is true. So we need to hash it out and figure it out, and come to an honest realization of what the truth is. And I've often found out that it's before I was a Christian, I thought Christians were closed-minded, but now I've found out it's actually the exact opposite. There's some, like, the most open-minded people I know in the world are almost all Christians. So,
it's exceptionally frustrating when you meet a Christian who is closed-minded, and I'm like, man, you're a Christian,
right?
By luck, by chance. Like, you're lucky you're right, because you are not actually thinking about this critically. And honestly, again, it'll be interesting to see how those people's lives turn out, because it surely funnels you into nominal Christianity eventually. If you don't know why what you're saying is true, you're just saying it very loudly because your parents told you it was true and you feel entitled to spread your opinion. Well, you're not making sure it's true. You don't love truth. That's a problem. Even for somebody who proclaims Christianity, that's not okay, actually. And it makes you... It's almost like, I'd rather you didn't spread the gospel just yet, because you're just saying stuff right now. Let's love the truth a little bit more and figure out why we're saying what we're saying, because some smart person's going to come along and get your behind stuck, and then you're going to have a faith crisis.
Yep. Yeah, the Bible does tell us to, like, one of the prerequisites of ministry is not to be a novice. And
Yeah.
it tells us to be ready always. 1 Peter 3:15, be ready always to defend the hope that is within you.
Yeah.
To make a defense for the hope that is within you. So, yeah, that's just part of it. People need to just embrace that and move on with their life, I think. So
Beautiful. Awesome. I think that wraps us up. That wraps us up nicely, Bill. I appreciate you so much. That was a lot of fun, and hopefully we can do something similar to this at some other point.
Always, man. Appreciate it. Appreciate you. Appreciate the friendship and the contribution you make here at HCU. Just glad you're part of the family.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you. I'll see you this week. Take care.
All right. See you, brother.